My name is Carmen and I thought I was living the best moment of my life. The preparations for my wedding with Javier were in full swing, and Barcelona seemed to shine with a special light this sunny summer. Each day brought its own little joys, choosing the flowers, trying on the dress, tasting the cake. Everything seemed perfect, until that famous Sunday. That day we were invited to eat at the home of my in-laws, Dolores and Fernando. It was the usual invitation, but nothing special. I was even looking forward to going there to share the latest news about the organization of the ceremony. When we stopped in front of her house in the neighborhood of Gracia, Javier and I exchanged a knowing glance. The delicious smell of Dolores' paella was already in the air. That smells good, I said, smiling at Javier. He smiled back and rang the doorbell. Dolores appeared, resplendent in her flowery summer dress. "Welcome, my darlings," she exclaimed, hugging us warmly. We entered the cool house, a relief from the heat outside. Fernando was waiting for us in the living room, a glass of sangria in his hand. "Cheers," he said cheerfully. The meal passed in a relaxed atmosphere. We talked about everything and nothing, mentioning from time to time some detail of the wedding. I had no idea what was going to happen next. As we ate dessert, a crema catalana of which Dolores had the secret, my mother-in-law put down her spoon and stared at me. "Carmen, dear, there's something we need to talk about." Her serious tone made me look up from my plate. I noticed Javier and Fernando exchanging complicit glances. "Yes, Dolores," I replied, with a hint of concern in my voice. "It's about the guest list for the wedding," she began. "We think it needs some changes." My heart cringed. The guest list had been a difficult topic of discussion for the past few weeks. We had finally found a balance between our respective families and friends. "What changes?" I asked cautiously. Dolores took a deep breath before dropping her bombshell. "We think it would be best to remove your parents, Antonio and Maria, from the guest list." I was speechless, unable to utter a single word had I heard correctly. "And would like to replace them with some of our friends," he added, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I turned to Javier, seeking his support, but to my surprise he nodded. "Javier," I mumbled incredulously. "I think it's a good idea, honey," he said quietly. "My parents have many important friends who could be useful for our future." I couldn't believe my ears. How could they suggest something like that? How could Javier agree? "But they are my parents," I stammered, feeling anger welling up inside me. "We understand, Carmen," Fernando interjected. "But you have to think about the future of your new family. These connections could be crucial to Javier's career." I looked in turn at the three faces watching me, waiting for my reaction. How had it come to this? Only a few minutes ago, we were laughing and talking happily about our future happiness. "What do you think, my dear?" asked Dolores, an encouraging smile on her lips. My mind was going a mile a minute. I wanted to scream, to protest, to tell them how absurd and hurtful this idea was. But the words got stuck in my throat. I felt Javier's gaze, and for the first time I didn't recognize the man I loved. Finally, in a barely audible whisper, I replied, "Okay." That simple word seemed to have knocked all the air out of my lungs. Dolores clapped her hands in delight. "Perfect. I knew you'd understand, Carmen. You really are a golden girl." Javier took my hand and squeezed it gently, as if to thank me. But all I felt was cold. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I smiled and nodded mechanically as Dolores listed the names of her important friends who would take my parents' place. Each name was like a stab in my heart. On the way home, in the car, a heavy silence fell between Javier and me. He tried to break it. "You've been wonderful, my love. I know it hasn't been easy, but you'll see, it's for our own good." I turned my head towards the window, watching the streets of Barcelona go by without really seeing them. A storm was raging in my mind. How was I going to tell my parents? How was I going to look at myself in the mirror after agreeing to something like that? When we got back to our apartment, I locked myself in the bathroom, pretending I wanted to take a bath. In reality, I needed to be alone, to give free rein to my emotions. The tears I had been holding back all afternoon finally flowed. Sitting on the edge of the bathtub, I remembered all the moments I had shared with my parents. Christmas with my family, their encouragement during exams, their pride when I graduated. And now I had to tell them that they wouldn't be there on the most important day of my life. Anger began to replace sadness. How could Javier have accepted this? How could he have said okay? This was not who I was. This was not the wedding I had dreamed of. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my best friend, Sophia. "Carmen, are you okay?" she asked, concerned about my late call. "Sophia, I need your help," I said in a shaky voice. "I think I just made a big mistake." For the next hour, I told him everything. Dolores' proposal, Javier's agreement, my stupid response. "My God, Carmen, this is crazy, you can't accept it." "I know," I muttered. "But what can I do now?" There was silence on the other end of the line, then Sophia continued, "You have to talk to them. First with Javier. If he really loves you, he will understand that this is unacceptable." I knew she was right, but the thought of facing Javier terrified me. What if I found out that the man I loved had completely changed? What if it doesn't work? I asked in a trembling voice. "So, my dear, you're going to have to make a tough decision. But remember, you deserve better than this. Your parents deserve better than this." After hanging up, I sat for a long time on the bathroom floor, thinking about what to do. One thing was certain, I couldn't leave things as they were. Finally, I got up, took a deep breath and opened the door. Javier was sitting in the living room, distractedly watching TV. "Javier," I said in a voice I wanted to be firm. "We need to talk." He looked at me, surprised by my tone. "What's wrong, honey?" I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "I can't exclude my parents from our wedding. It's impossible." His face closed up. "Carmen, we've talked about this. It's for our future." "Our future?" I repeated, incredulous. "What kind of future are we building if we start by excluding my family?" We would spend hours talking, arguing, sometimes even yelling. But the more we talked, the more I realized that Javier had changed. Or maybe I was finally seeing him for who he was. That night, lying in bed with Javier sleeping peacefully beside me, I made a decision. I couldn't go on like this. I deserved better. My parents deserved better. The next morning, as the sun was rising over Barcelona, I was already awake, my mind racing. A crazy idea was beginning to form in my mind. An idea that would change everything. The days that followed that terrible discussion were a real torture. I woke up every morning with a weight on my chest, knowing that I had to pretend. Javier seemed to have forgotten about our discussion and went about his business as if nothing had happened. As for Dolores, she called me almost every day to tell me about the preparations, enthusiastically mentioning the friends who were going to attend the wedding. Every time I heard her voice, I got a knot in my stomach. But secretly, my mind was boiling. I could not accept this situation. I could not get married without my parents. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this marriage, as it was taking shape, was not the one I had dreamed of. It was not the beginning of a new life, but the end of everything I believed in. One morning, when Javier had left for work, I plucked up my courage and called my parents. My mother picked up the phone and her warm voice instantly comforted me. "Carmen, my daughter, what a joy to hear from you." I felt tears well up in my eyes. How could I even think of excluding them from my marriage? "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "I have to talk to you and Dad. It's important." There was silence on the other end of the line and my mother resumed the conversation in a serious tone. "Of course, honey. What's the matter? We are worried about you. I'd rather talk it over with you in person. Can you come to Barcelona this weekend?" 2 days later, I was sitting in a small, discreet cafe in the Born, nervously awaiting my parents' arrival. I had taken advantage of a shopping trip with Sophia to escape Javier's surveillance. When I saw my parents walk through the door of the cafe, my heart shrank. They looked worried, their faces etched with apprehension. I got up to hug them, holding them close to me. "Carmen," my father said, looking into my eyes, "tell us what's wrong." We sat down and I took a deep breath. Then the words began to flow. I told them everything: Dolores' request, Javier's agreement, my initial response. As I spoke, I could see their faces turn from surprise to anger to sadness. "Oh, my child," my mother whispered, tears in her eyes. "How could they ask such a thing of you?" My father, for his part, clenched his fists on the table. "This is unacceptable. I'm going to talk with Javier and his parents." "No, Dad," I said, putting my hand over his. "I have a plan. But I need you to trust me." They looked at me, intrigued. Then I explained what I had in mind. As I explained my idea, I saw their expressions change. Anger gave way to surprise and then a gleam of pride in their eyes. "Are you sure you want to do this, Carmen?" my mother asked worriedly. I nodded my head. "It's the only way. I can't get married under these conditions. I can't start my married life with a lie like this." My father grabbed my hand. "We are with you, whatever you decide. But are you sure you won't regret it?" I looked at my parents, the two people who had always supported me, who had taught me the importance of honesty and respect. "The only thing I would regret is not being true to myself and my values." After our meeting, I was both relieved and terrified. The plan was in place, but the hardest part was yet to come. The next day I went to Sagrada Familia. I had not made an appointment, hoping that Father Enrique would be available. Luckily, I found him in his office. "Carmen," he exclaimed upon seeing me. "What a surprise. The big day is coming, isn't it?" I sat across from him, my heart pounding. "Father Henry, I need your help." He must have sensed the gravity in my voice, because his expression immediately became serious. "What is it, my child?" For the next hour, I told her everything. Dolores' request, my decision, my plan. Father Enrique listened to me attentively, without interrupting me. When I finished, he remained silent for a long time, as if weighing each of my words. "Carmen," he finally said, "what you are asking of me is unorthodox." I lowered my eyes, feeling hope slipping away. But he continued, "However, marriage is a sacrament of love and truth. What you propose, though radical, is in keeping with these principles." I raised my head, not daring to believe it. "So, will you help me?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, Carmen. I will help you. But are you sure you want to go ahead? The consequences will be significant." "I am aware of that, Father. But I can't start my married life with a lie." We spent the next hour working out the details of my plan. When I left the church, I was both terrified and relieved. The hardest part was yet to come, but at least I had allies. The following weeks were a real balancing act. I had to play along, smile at Dolores' comments about the guests, agree with Javier's decisions about the ceremony. Every day was a test, every conversation a challenge not to break down and reveal everything. Sofia was invaluable during this period. Aside from my parents and my father Enrique, she was the only one who knew my plan. She listened to me when I needed to talk and comforted me when I had doubts. "You are the bravest woman I know," she told me one afternoon as we sat on my balcony, watching the sun set over Barcelona. "I don't know if I would have had the strength to do what you are doing." I smile sadly. "I'm scared, Sofia. What if I'm wrong? What if I make the biggest mistake of my life?" She took my hand in hers. "Carmen, listen to me. The mistake would be to marry a man who doesn't respect you, who doesn't respect your family. You deserve better than that." Those words resonated with me, reminding me why I had made this decision in the first place. As D-Day approached, my anxiety skyrocketed. I slept poorly and ate little. Javier noticed my condition, attributing it to the stress of the preparations. I was trying to be attentive, which only added to my guilt. Sometimes I would watch him sleep and wonder how we had gotten there. How was it possible that the man I loved had changed enough to ask me to exclude my parents from our wedding? On the eve of the big day, just as I was finalizing the details with Sofia, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Carmen, honey," she said, her voice betraying her excitement. "Your father and I, we just wanted to tell you how proud we are of you. Whatever happens tomorrow, we will always be by your side." These words gave me the strength I needed. I hung up the phone, determined. Tomorrow would be the most important day of my life, but not for the reasons everyone imagined. That night, lying in bed with Javier sleeping peacefully beside me, I thought about how far we had come. To the naive young woman I had been just a few weeks before, who thought love could overcome everything. To the woman I had become, willing to fight for her values, for her family. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would take control of my life. Sleep eluded me, my mind was going round and round every detail of the plan. Had I planned everything? Had I not forgotten anything? And, above all, would I have the courage to carry it out? When dawn appeared on the horizon, coloring Barcelona's sky pink, I got up slowly, careful not to wake Javier. I approached the window and contemplated the awakening of the city. In a few hours I would be walking to the altar of the Sagrada Familia. But it would not be to say yes. It would be to say no. No to a marriage without true love. No to a life of compromise and lies. I took a deep breath and felt a strange serenity come over me. Whatever happened today, I knew I had made the right decision. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace with myself. As the big day approached, the atmosphere around me became more and more suffocating. Each passing minute seemed to make the air heavier, almost unbreathable. I felt like an actress playing the most difficult role of her career, forced to wear a mask all the time. Dolores, my future mother-in-law, was in her element. She literally glowed, taking charge of all aspects of the preparations with an energy that, under other circumstances, would have been admirable. Each day brought new decisions, last-minute changes and, of course, comments about the prestigious guests who would be attending the ceremony. "Carmen, my dear," she said to me one day as we were choosing the floral arrangements, "you can't imagine how excited I am. Judge Ramirez has confirmed his presence. He is an old friend of Fernando's, you know that. And there will also be Dr. Martinez, that renowned surgeon. Oh, and let's not forget Maria Elena, the mayor's wife." I nodded my head and sketched a smile. "That's wonderful, Dolores," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray my lack of enthusiasm. And she continues, unperturbed, "I've also managed to convince Chef Rodrigo to take care of the menu. He has a Michelin-starred restaurant. He doesn't normally do weddings, but for us he made an exception." Each of his words was like a stab. Those people, those distinguished guests, took the place of my family and childhood friends. I thought of my parents, who would have to stay home on the day of their only daughter's wedding. My heart shrank. As for Javier, he seemed more and more distant. He spent the day at the office, coming home late at night under the pretext of a big file he had to finish before the wedding. When he was home, he was often distracted, lost in thought. Our conversations were limited to the practical details of the wedding or banalities about the day. One night, as we dined in silence, I tried to engage in a deeper conversation. "Javier," I began, "are you really happy with this marriage?" He looked up from his plate, surprised by my question. "Of course, honey, why do you ask?" I played with my food, searching for my words. "It's just that, it all seems so far from what we dreamed at first. All these guests we barely know, the absence of my parents." He put down his fork and his face contracted slightly. "Carmen, we've talked about this. It's for our future. These connections are important. More important than family," I insisted. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple. You know, my parents have invested a lot in this marriage. And these people can help us a lot with our careers." I felt anger welling up inside me, but I suppressed it. It wasn't the time to explode, not now. "I understand," I said simply, returning to my mask of meek bride-to-be. The rest of dinner passed in heavy silence. As the days passed, I could feel Sophia's worried gaze on me. My best friend was the only one who knew my true state of mind, the only one I could trust without restraint. One afternoon, when we were supposed to be doing the last fittings for our dresses, Sophia took me to a small, discreet cafe. "Carmen," she said, taking my hands in hers, "I'm worried about you. You seem off." I tried to smile, but I knew it was useless. Sophia knew me too well. "I'm fine, Sophia. It's just the stress of the preparations." She shook her head. "No, it's more than that. I've known you since we were kids. I've never seen that look in your eyes. It's like you're dying inside." His words broke the dam I had built around my emotions. Tears began to roll down my cheeks, first silently and then in uncontrollable sobs. Sophia hugged me and rocked me gently. "Oh, Carmen," she murmured. "Are you sure you want to go through with this plan? There's still time to cancel." I shook my head, wiping away tears. "No, I have to do it. Not just for me, but for my parents, for everything I believe in. I can't start my married life with a lie like this." Sophia gave me a long look and then nodded. "You are the bravest woman I know, Carmen. No matter what happens, I will be by your side." These moments with Sophia were like puffs of oxygen in the suffocating atmosphere around me. But they were rare and precious, because I had to be careful not to arouse suspicion. The tension reached its peak a week before the wedding. Dolores had organized a small group dinner to celebrate the last days before the ceremony. Of course, his definition of a small group included about 30 people, all members of his prestigious social circle. The evening was taking place in an elegant downtown restaurant. I was seated between Javier and an influential businessman whose name I could not remember. The conversation revolved around the latest gossip of Barcelona's high society, ongoing business deals, real estate projects. I felt completely disconnected, as if I were witnessing the scene from outside my own body. Suddenly, Dolores' voice rose above the din, "And of course we are all delighted that Carmen has understood how important this union is for our family, aren't we, my dear?" All eyes turned to me. I felt my heart racing and a lump in my throat. For a moment, I was tempted to reveal everything, to shout the truth to all those people. But I pulled myself together and forced myself to smile. "Of course, Dolores. I am delighted to be part of this family." The words burned in my throat as I said them. Javier squeezed my hand under the table, probably thinking it would comfort me. But the gesture only made me feel worse. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I smiled, I nodded, I politely answered questions, but inside I was screaming. That night, back at home, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, listening to Javier's constant breathing, I wondered for the umpteenth time if I had made the right decision. Wasn't I ruining everything? Ruining my life and Javier's? But whenever I had doubts, I thought of my parents, of their unconditional love, of their sacrifices for me. I thought of my own values, of the importance I placed on honesty and integrity. And I knew there was no turning back. The next few days were a whirlwind of final preparations. Last-minute fittings, guest lists, rehearsals at the church. Every detail was scrutinized, every moment planned. And at every moment I felt the weight of my secret on my shoulders. Sophia remained my rock, my anchor in this storm. She was there every time I felt like I was going to collapse, reminding me why I was doing all this. "You're stronger than you think, Carmen," he told me on the eve of the big day, over coffee on my terrace. "Tomorrow you're going to take back the reins of your life. Whatever happens, you can be proud of yourself." I watched the sun set over Barcelona, its golden rays illuminating the Sagrada Familia in the distance. By this time tomorrow, it would all be over. For better or worse, my life would never be the same again. That night, as Javier slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake thinking about our history. How had it come to this? When exactly had we begun to drift apart? Was there a precise moment when I could have changed the course of events? I got up quietly and went out onto the balcony. The city was quiet, only some distant traffic noises disturbed the silence of the night. I thought of my parents, who must have been as awake as I was, anxious about the next day. I thought of Dolores and Fernando, probably excited about the idea of their son having a good wedding. I thought of all those guests who were about to witness a spectacle whose true nature was unknown to them. And I thought to myself, of the young woman full of hope and love that I was just a few months ago. From the woman I had become, willing to risk everything to remain true to herself. As dawn began to break on the horizon, I took a deep breath. In a few hours I would be walking down the aisle of the Sagrada Familia. But it would not be to say yes to a life of compromise and lies. It would be to say no to everything that was not in line with my values and convictions. Whatever happened today, one thing was clear to me: I would finally be free. Dawn was breaking in Barcelona, bathing the city in golden light. It was D-Day, the day I had feared and waited for so long. I looked out the window of my hotel room to contemplate the awakening of the city and felt my heart pounding in my chest. The night before, following tradition, I had slept apart from Javier. This solitude had allowed me to collect my thoughts and strengthen my resolve. Now, as the sun rose in the sky, I knew there was no turning back. A discreet knock at the door brought me out of my musings. It was Sophia, already dressed as a bridesmaid, an encouraging smile on her lips. "Ready for the big day?" she asked softly as she entered the room. I took a deep breath. "As smart as I can be." He reached over and took me in his arms. "You are the bravest woman I know, Carmen. Whatever happens today, I am proud of you." These words comforted me, giving me the strength I needed to face what was to come. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The hairdresser and makeup artist arrived, transforming my tense face into that of a radiant bride. Every brushstroke, every hairpin seemed to bring me a little closer to the inevitable. Dolores entered the room just as I was putting on my wedding dress. She was beaming, her eyes shining with excitement. "Oh, Carmen," she exclaimed when she saw me. "You look beautiful. Javier is going to be blown away." I forced a smile, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Thank you, Dolores." She fussed around me, adjusting a fold here, smoothing a bow there. "I can't wait for you to be part of our family," she said, taking my hands. "You'll see, it will be the happiest day of your life." If she only knew. The ride to the Sagrada Familia was marked by a tense silence. I looked out the window of the limousine and watched the streets of Barcelona go by. Each passing meter brought us closer to the church, and I felt my heart racing. When we finally arrived, I was almost overwhelmed by the sight of the magnificent cathedral before me. The Sagrada Familia, with its soaring towers and ornate facades, seemed to mock me, reminding me of the importance of what was about to happen inside. A crowd of photographers and onlookers had gathered in front of the entrance. Sophia and the other bridesmaids surrounded me to protect me. "It's going to be okay," Sophia murmured, briefly squeezing my hand. I nodded imperceptibly, taking a deep breath before I started up the steps to the church. Inside, the bustle of guests settling in reached me. I could hear the excitement in their voices, the anticipation of what they thought would be a fairy-tale wedding. If only they knew. Father Enrique came to greet me discreetly before I took my place for the entrance. His eyes met mine and I saw understanding in his gaze. I knew what was coming and felt a surge of gratitude for her silent support. "May God give you strength, my daughter," he murmured before returning to the altar. The first notes of the wedding march resounded in the cathedral. It was the signal. The time had come. The doors opened and suddenly all eyes were on me. I started walking alone down the center aisle. Each step seemed to last an eternity. I felt the eyes of hundreds of people on me, heard the murmurs of admiration, saw the smiles on the faces of the guests. But the only thing I could see was Javier, standing at the altar, waiting for me with a radiant smile. For a moment, seeing him like that, I was tempted to abandon my plan. Maybe we could be happy after all. But then my eyes scanned the crowd and I realized that I hardly recognized anyone. All those strange faces, those important friends of Dolores and Fernando, had taken the place of my family and friends. And the clamorous absence of my parents hit me hard, rekindling my determination. I finally arrived at the altar. Javier held my hand, smiling wider than ever. "You are beautiful," he murmured. Father Enrique began the ceremony. His words seemed to come from far away, as if I were underwater. My heart was beating so fast that I was sure everyone could hear him. "We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." I looked at Javier, trying to etch his face into my memory. Despite everything that had happened, a part of me still loved him. But now I knew that love wasn't enough. Not when it was at the expense of my principles, of my family. Father Enrique continued the ceremony, but I could no longer hear his words. In my head, I was rehearsing what I was going to say, preparing myself for the crucial moment. At last the moment arrived. Father Enrique turned to me. "Carmen, do you agree to take Javier as your lawful wedded husband, to love and cherish him, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" The silence that followed was deafening. I felt all eyes on me, the anticipation palpable in the air. Javier was looking at me, his smile beginning to waver at my hesitation. I took a deep breath. It was now or never. I can't. These 3 words seemed to echo throughout the cathedral. A murmur of surprise went through the congregation. Javier's face went from confusion to disbelief. "Carmen," he murmured, his voice trembling. I turned to the assembly, feeling a strange calm come over me. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this. I can't start our life together with a lie." The murmuring intensified. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Dolores suddenly stand up, her face pale. "A few weeks ago," I continued, my voice getting louder, "I was asked to take my parents off the guest list to make room for important contacts. I was told it was for our future, for our career. But what kind of future can you build if you exclude those you love?" I turned to Javier with tears in my eyes. "I love you, Javier. But I can't be the woman your family wants me to be. I can't deny my values, my family, because of social connections." Chaos broke out in the church. People stood up, talking loudly, some looking indignant, others confused. Dolores approached me, her face contorted with anger. "How dare you?" she hissed. "After all we've done for you." But before I could continue, the church doors swung wide open. In walked my parents, followed by my closest friends. Suddenly, the congregation fell silent. "Dad, Mom," I said, feeling a huge weight leave my shoulders. They approached me, ignoring their shocked faces. My mother hugged me and murmured words of comfort. I turned one last time to Javier, who had not moved, frozen in place. "I'm sorry, Javier. I hope someday you will understand." With a slow movement, I took off my veil and placed it on the altar. Then, before the astonished gaze of the entire congregation, I walked down the altar steps, hand in hand with my parents. As I passed Sophia, I saw tears in her eyes, but also pride. She nodded her head in encouragement. The walk to the church doors seemed interminable. I felt all eyes on me, heard the surprised murmurs, the indignant exclamations. But, strangely, I felt lighter than I had for weeks. When we finally passed through the gates of the Sagrada Familia, I was momentarily dazzled by the sunlight. The fresh air on my face was like a breath of freedom. We descended the steps, ignoring the photographers who were frantically crowding around us. At the top of the stairs a cab was waiting for us. Sophia had thought of everything. As we climbed into the car, I took one last look at the majestic cathedral. Part of me was saddened by what could have been, but another, stronger part knew I had made the right decision. The cab took off, taking us away from the Sagrada Familia, from Javier, from the life I had almost chosen. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was eager to find out. The cab sped through the streets of Barcelona, taking us away from the Sagrada Familia and the chaos I had just caused. The car was silent, each of us engrossed in our own thoughts. My mother held my hand, squeezing it gently from time to make sure I was there. My father, sitting in the front seat, frequently glanced in the rearview mirror, his face split between concern and pride. Suddenly, the reality of what I had just done hit me hard. I had said no. I had refused to get married in front of hundreds of people. I had scandalized Barcelona's high society, probably ruined Javier's family's reputation and perhaps even jeopardized his career. A wave of panic threatened to invade me. "Breathe, honey," my mother murmured, sensing my confusion. "You did the right thing." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. Had I really done the right thing? Hadn't I destroyed my life and Javier's out of pure selfishness? The cab stopped in front of a small cafe in the Gracia neighborhood. We had arranged to meet there after the ceremony. Sophia was already there. She had left the church shortly after us. Her face lit up when she saw us arrive. "Carmen," he exclaimed as he hugged me. "You were amazing." We sat at a secluded table and ordered much-needed coffees. For a while, no one spoke. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, replaced by an overwhelming weariness. "So," my father said at last, breaking the silence, "what do we do now?" That was the million-dollar question. What was I going to do now? I had spent so much time preparing for this day, planning my refusal, that I hadn't really thought about what would come next. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. You can come and stay with us for as long as you need, my mother immediately offered. The idea was tempting. To return to my hometown, away from all the chaos, away from Barcelona and its memories. But part of me knew it would only be a temporary getaway. I think I'll stay here, I finally said. I need to face the consequences of my actions. My parents exchanged glances and then my father nodded. We are proud of you, Carmen. Whatever you decide, we will always be by your side. These words warmed my heart, reminding me why I had made this decision in the first place. For my family, for my values, for myself. Suddenly, my phone, which I had left in my bag, began to vibrate frantically. Dozens of notifications appeared on the screen, missed calls, messages, social media alerts. The outside world was catching up with us. Oh my God, Sophia muttered, looking at her own phone. Carmen, you're going viral. He showed me his screen. Videos of my rejection at the altar were already circulating on social media. The hashtags #CarmenDitNon and #MarieFugueuse were catching on. I felt a knot in my stomach. I hadn't thought about the media repercussions of what I had done. In my mind, it was supposed to remain a private, family affair. But of course, with all those important guests, how could I be so naive? What am I going to do? I asked, panic growing in my voice. Sophia put a reassuring hand on my arm. We'll work it out together. For now, I suggest you turn off your phone and take a step back. I nodded, grateful for his calm and encouraging presence. Just as I was about to turn off the phone, a message from Javier appeared on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. Carmen, we need to talk. Please. I showed the message to my parents and Sophia answer it. Ignore it. I think you should talk to him, my father said after a moment's thought. Not now, but soon. You both need to close this chapter properly. I knew he was right, but the thought of confronting Javier terrified me. How could I explain my actions without hurting him even more? The rest of the day passed in a haze. We stayed in the cafe, sheltered from the outside world, talking about the future, the possible consequences, what to do next. Sophia left at one point to pick up some things from my apartment, the apartment I had been sharing with Javier until this morning. When she returned, her face was serious. The paparazzi are starting to gather outside the building, he informed us. I think it would be best if you didn't go inside right now. I was starting to come to grips with the reality of my new situation. I was homeless, at the center of a media scandal and had just turned many people's lives upside down. Guilt and doubt threatened to wash over me. What if I've made a terrible mistake? I muttered, more to myself than to anyone else. My mother took me in her arms. Darling, listen to me. You followed your heart. You were true to your values. This is not a mistake. But I've hurt so many people. Sometimes, my father interjected, you have to know how to hurt to avoid greater suffering in the long run. You avoided a marriage that would have made you unhappy, that could have ended in a painful divorce years later. Her words made sense, but the guilt lingered. I thought of Javier, of the pain and humiliation he must feel. I thought of Dolores and Fernando, of their anger and disappointment. Although I knew I had made the right decision for me, I could not help but feel guilty for the pain I had caused. It was late afternoon in Barcelona when we finally decided to leave the cafe. Sophia had reserved a hotel room for me, a discreet place to hide from the world for a few days. Just as we were about to leave, a familiar figure entered the cafe. It was Father Enrique. He saw us right away and approached our table. Carmen, he said softly, I'm glad I found you. I stiffened, expecting a reproach, but his face expressed only compassion. I wanted to tell you, he continued, that you have shown great courage today. Marriage is a sacrament of love and truth. By refusing to celebrate it with lies, you have honored its true meaning. His words moved me deeply, relieving some of my guilt. Thank you, Father, I whispered, my eyes filling with tears. He laid a gentle hand on my shoulder. The road won't be easy, but you've made the right decision. Never doubt it. When Father Enrique left, we headed back to the hotel. Night had fallen over Barcelona, transforming the city into a landscape of twinkling lights. As we walked, I couldn't help but think of all the times Javier and I had walked these same streets, hand in hand, full of dreams and plans. When we arrived at the hotel, my parents kissed me tenderly before leaving. They had decided to stay a few days in Barcelona, staying at a nearby hotel to be near me. "Call us anytime if you need anything," my mother insisted. Sophia stayed with me, insisting on spending the night in my room. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," she told me firmly. Once in the bedroom, the exhaustion of the day took its toll on me. I collapsed on the bed, still in my crumpled wedding dress. Sophia sat next to me and stroked my hair. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked softly. I shook my head. I didn't have the strength to talk, not now. All I wanted was to sleep and forget, if only for a few hours, the chaos I had unleashed. But sleep was not easy. I spent hours tossing and turning in bed, replaying in my head the events of the day. Javier's astonished face, Dolores' anger, the murmurs of the crowd. Everything was mixed in a whirlwind of emotions and remorse. Early in the morning, when the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, I got up slowly, careful not to wake Sophia, who was sleeping on the sofa. I walked over to the window and watched Barcelona wake up. The city looked the same as yesterday, but everything had changed. My world had been turned upside down in the space of a few hours. I had lost a future husband, an in-laws, maybe even some friends. But I had gained something more valuable, loyalty to myself. I didn't know what the future held. I knew the days ahead would be difficult, full of explanations, confrontations, maybe even legal action if Javier's family decided to take revenge. But for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace with myself. I was no longer the runaway bride, the woman who had said no to the altar. She was simply Carmen, a woman who had had the courage to follow her heart, whatever the consequences. As the sun rose in the sky, illuminating the streets of Barcelona, I felt a new hope welling up inside me. Whatever the future held for me, I was ready to face it. With my family, with my true friends and, above all, with myself.